how does muscle factor into those three parts of the journey? Well, as muscle deteriorates and we become less metabolically flexible and we are having more of this insulin resistance, that again starts to confuse ovarian function, and then we're not ovulating as regularly, then we're not making enough progesterone, and that's going to impact how much PMS you experience in your normal cycling years. And it is going to exacerbate the symptoms that you're feeling in perimenopause. If you've been listening to this show, you know I don't believe in one-size-fits-all solutions because your body isn't one-size-fits-all. That's why we created Flow Living, to support your hormones with both targeted supplements and the cycle syncing methodology. It's about giving your body what it needs when it needs it so you can feel more balanced, more energized, and more like yourself throughout the month. If you're ready to try it, you can get 25% off with the code podcast25 at flowliving.com. I'm really excited about today's episode because, first of all, weight is a very personal issue to me. I've been obese officially once in my life, and then I was 210 pounds. And then in both of my pregnancies, I got back up to 210 pounds. And I've lost and maintained about a 60-pound weight loss for many, many years. I want to share today something that I wish that I could go back in time and tell myself about, weight management and what the right strategy is. But, this is a show also about hormones, right? So we're going to be talking about weight, but I want to do it through the lens of our ovaries and our hormones, and why I think this conversation today is so important for us as women at any age and stage. So this is an episode if you're in your late teens, if you're in your 20s, your 30s, your 40s, 50s, and beyond. This applies to every woman. And that's really the whole point of this show. The Ovary Club is for every woman because we all have ovaries. We're all connected with our ovaries. And ovaries are the connection point to everything in our health. So what is this magical thing that I want to talk about today? Well, today I want to talk about muscle. Muscle is the most important missing piece when it comes to biohacking our hormonal health. It's not something that we think about, but it's something I want you to be thinking about after today's episode. So today we're going to talk about what you need to understand about the role muscle plays in your hormones and in your ovarian health. I want to talk to you about how muscle loss can actually make some of your hormonal symptoms worse. I want you to start understanding how you can actually realistically start building muscle regardless of how busy you are and, how chaotic your life is. I want you to learn about what the bare minimum effective dose is. I have a friend who says she's not a biohacker, but she's a bioslacker. And I love that because let's just do the least amount possible to get the most result. I am there for that, for sure, especially because the whole point of this is to play the long game, right? And not to do things that are so extreme and so unsustainable that you just try it for a little bit of a time and then you abandon it. Let's figure out what we can realistically do. And on that note, how to know when you're doing too much with your workouts. So before we get into all of that, if you haven't already followed the Ovary Club on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, please make sure to do that now so you don't miss an episode. I release them every week. And if this show has been useful to you, please leave a rating, leave a comment. It really genuinely helps other women find the show. And that is really the whole point. We want to make sure that every woman knows how to take care of her health. And you're on my team to help make sure that we can do that. So please share it. Okay, so let's get into it. First, I want to start with the 7 things you need to know about the role that muscle plays in women's hormones and ovarian aging. So the first thing is that muscle is one of the most important metabolic organs, right? Muscles are not just about aesthetics and athletics, right? It's a metabolically active organ that does critical work every single day. So what do I mean by that? Your body can only store glucose in 2 places, right? Think of them like bags or containers, right? You've got the container of your fat cells, right? When you've eaten, let's say, more carbohydrates than you need for a given period of time and activity level. So let's say, for example, you have a big plate of pasta and then you sit down and work at your computer. So now you've overnourished your body from a carbohydrate perspective. So one of the things that's going to happen is immediately the cells are going to take in that glucose. It's going to transport that to the brain, which will help you with whatever you're doing on the computer, the heart, which is good, keep your blood pumping, and the muscle, except if you're sitting down, you're not really going to be using a ton of muscle at the time. So then we have all this extra circulating glucose, and where's it going to go? It's going to go into your fat containers, right? And if there's not enough, it'll start generating more adipose tissue to store all that extra glucose. Now, here's the thing. If you have been building muscle tissue, then a little bit more of it will go into feeding your muscle. But add on strength training to that and timing when you expose your body to all those carbohydrates alongside with your strength training routine. And now instead of just shuttling all of that glucose into stored fat, the container of stored fat, now it's going to start bringing all of that in to growing and building muscle mass. That's what we want. And it's really interesting because we only get to sort of max out our natural muscle development at 35. So think about, this is why I think this is an episode for every woman. If I could go back in a time capsule and tell little young Alisa, who was dealing with obesity and her PMOS, to do one thing that I didn't do at that time in my recovery journey, it would have been to add strength conditioning to my routine. But when we know better, we do better. Now we know. So anybody who's dealing with PMOS now, please start adding strength training. But every woman, I mean, my oldest daughter is going to be 12 in a couple of months. She's doing body weight training. After she's like 16, 17, we'll add in some light weights, but absolutely focus. If you're a mom and you have teens, tweens, like get them conditioning their bodies. It's never too young to start being strong. Like I said, so this is a metabolically active organ. When you give it glucose and you're regularly training it, you're going to be putting that muscle under tension, and then you're going to be able to send glucose to the muscle. And that's a really healthy place for it to be. But without enough muscle, the body defaults to storing that glucose as fat. And over time, this poor glucose storage sets off a hormonal chain reaction, driving up insulin, cortisol, and inflammation. All things that are terrible for your ovaries. Remember, your ovaries are listening. They're an ecosystem. They're listening to what is happening in the body. And if you have insulin dysregulation, the ovaries are extremely sensitive to that. It will absolutely impair their function, ovulation regularity. It will increase their rate of aging. And then inflammation in the body is terrible. So ovaries do experience inflammaging, and not building enough lean muscle, turns out, is something that your ovaries don't like. So think about muscle as the metabolic infrastructure that your hormones depend on, right? Because your ovaries are the place that the hormones are being manufactured, at least your sex hormones. And they're listening to what your body is doing in terms of its activity level. Okay, point number 2 is that low muscle mass actually makes blood sugar regulation harder. Without enough muscle tissue to absorb and buffer glucose, blood sugar spikes more easily and crashes as well. It stays elevated for longer. And this creates a more reactive, unstable metabolic environment. Blood sugar instability, like I said earlier, ripples into that cortisol, insulin, and inflammation situation, which has a direct impact on your hormonal health. And this is why women who feel like that have low muscle mass, that feel like their diet is fine, but still experience energy crashes and cravings and mood swings, and will have weight that won't move. This really has to do with that interplay between the amount of muscle you have and how your body is able to utilize glucose. So that sort of leads into this third point, which is that poor insulin sensitivity can disrupt ovarian function. I mentioned this a little minute ago, but let's dive into it. When your blood sugar is chronically dysregulated and insulin has to work harder, or you become even more insulin resistant as a way to protect the cell from being overexposed to carbohydrates, this is really the beginning of that insulin resistance problem. High circulating insulin, it can stimulate the ovaries to produce excess androgens. So this is definitely an issue for women with PMOS, like myself. But this can happen to any woman, and this can interfere with normal follicle development and ovulation. So, like I said, this is one of the central challenges with women who have PMOS, but even women without it can experience milder versions, irregular cycles, low progesterone, shortened luteal phases. It's all connected, right? So, building muscle is one of the most powerful ways we actually have to improve insulin sensitivity, which then directly supports ovarian function. I think this is the most radical piece of information that we have as women, as a new lever for us. And I think it's going to be something that we think about from a much more longitudinal perspective. Like I said, you want to be thinking about this as a teenager and protecting and preserving your muscle mass throughout your health span as a woman, because it has such impactful um, benefits to the ovary. And I think as more research is done, we'll start to see how, in fact, the degree of muscle you maintain directly links to the rate of your ovarian aging. And, when I say ovarian aging, right, it isn't just about the time to menopause. It's how healthy your cycle is in your 20s, how fertile you are when you want to be, how easy you go through perimenopause without symptoms, right? That's the whole point of slowing down that ovarian aging process. And building lean muscle is definitely a way to do that. So, muscle, like I said, helps lower that inflammation. And inflammation is a driver, another driver of ovarian aging that I want to sort of focus on. That chronic low-grade inflammation is another way outside of the insulin piece that the ovary can start to age. And this is a big concern because women are entering, I've been in practice now helping women with their hormones for like 25 years at this point. I've never seen anything like what I've been seeing over the past 5 years, where women are starting their extreme symptom set perimenopause experience in like at the early 40s, right? This would be something that you experience just a few years before your last bleed. That is the more typical presentation, although I would argue that there's a lot that we can do to just sail through it more even keel, in a kind of even keel way. But the fact that we're seeing women at 42, at 44, flatlining with hormones, right, where their ovary is just no longer able to produce endogenous sex hormones, right? This is a sign of rapid ovarian aging. And on the other side of that equation, for moms who have young girls who are at some point going to be entering puberty, we're seeing the same kind of inflammaging of the ovary in girls who are 6, 7, 8, 9. I mean, I have pediatrician friends who are having, just serious concerns about why is it all of a sudden they have young girls 6, 7, 8 coming in with breast buds, which is a sign of rapid hormonal progression. And all of that's being driven by this ovarian inflammaging. It can happen to any woman at any age and stage. And inflammation is one of the key drivers. So is that insulin resistance that we talked about just a moment ago. So skeletal muscle is one of those really huge levers that can be very actively anti-inflammatory, but when you use the muscle, right? So regular strength training is really the thing that's going to reduce that inflammation over time. And when you build and maintain lots of lean muscle, you're creating a very low inflammatory environment for the ovary, which directly impacts the rate of your hormonal aging and shapes how you experience your whole every single hormonal inflection point. So really, really important. Another point is that muscle supports better hormone communication throughout the body. Hormones don't just need to be produced, they need to be received. And the health of your metabolic environment really determines how well that works. So, for example, when blood sugar is stable, cortisol is balanced, and insulin is functioning properly, all of which muscles help facilitate. So your hormones can actually do their jobs better when you have more muscle mass. I mean, this is just so cool, and not something that we really regularly include in the conversation about hormones. We always talk about balancing our hormones as if it's a cocktail of perfect herbs and things that and foods that you have to eat. But really, it's also about incorporating lifestyle, and exercise is this main one, specifically around strength training. Estrogen, progesterone, thyroid hormones, neurotransmitters like serotonin and dopamine all function better in a metabolically healthy body. Again, muscle being a huge determinant of that. So think about it like a cell phone, right? Your hormones might be sending signals, but if the infrastructure isn't there to engage them properly, the message doesn't get through or isn't as clear. Muscle loss, also another point that I want to make is that muscle loss actually can make symptoms of PMS, infertility, and perimenopause worse, right? So we know that in an earlier episode, I talked about fertility and muscle and how important that was. So you can always go back and listen to that. So the luteal phase is the thing that connects these three hormonal experiences, right? PMS or fertility or perimenopause. And what do I mean? That we would be able to make adequate levels of progesterone. And how does muscle factor into those three parts of the journey? Well, as muscle deteriorates and we become less metabolically flexible and we are having more of this insulin resistance that again starts to confuse ovarian function, and then we're not ovulating as regularly, then we're not making enough progesterone, and that's going to impact how much PMS you experience in your normal cycling years. It's going to impair your ability to maintain a pregnancy, and it is going to exacerbate the symptoms that you're feeling in perimenopause. So we know that studies show that women who have lower muscle mass tend to have more fertility challenges. We know that women who enter perimenopause with lower muscle mass have less of a buffer and more symptoms like hot flashes, just correlated to muscle mass. Mood instability, weight gain, metabolic disruption, all of those things hit harder in perimenopause without enough muscle mass. Women who go into perimenopause with adequate or good muscle mass have much different, it's like a totally different reality. You're on like one of two planets, planet perimenopause nightmare or planet perimenopause, this isn't so bad, right? And you want to kind of be on the other planet, right? And muscle is just you get such a huge return on your investment because you're going to have better insulin sensitivity, lower inflammation, and all of that directly impacts your symptoms and the transition you're going to experience. And the last thing is that, building muscle really helps protect your future, right? In terms of hormones, bone density, cognitive health, metabolism, cardiovascular health, and independence, right? So I've heard this somewhere and I just love it. Thick thighs save lives. I mean, if you can remember that, please, because it is true that the size of your quadriceps and hamstrings are actually correlated to lower dementia risk. Grip strength predicts better cardiovascular health, especially important as we are in our postmenopausal years and estrogen levels naturally decline a bit. Those cardioprotective benefits of estrogen are also lessened. And so grip strength can be a way. And weightlifting itself. I mean, I used to do a lot of cardio. Now I do mostly strength training. And let me tell you, when you're lifting really heavy and you're doing a bunch of squats, I mean, after each set, my heart is racing and I'm huffing and puffing and I need to take a break in between sets. And so you definitely get a heart workout when you are strength training. Bigger glutes, right, are actually associated with less hip fractures. Women who maintain muscle mass as they age maintain their mobility, their metabolic health, their cognitive health, their independence for longer. And so again, this is not about aesthetics. This is really about how every rep and all that time you invest in building muscle is like an investment in your future brain, heart, bone, and quality of life, right? It's all the health benefits, but it's also this longer term, playing the long game with your health. And I love that. Let's do things and have habits that we do consistently throughout our entire lives, from taking care of our hormones, building muscle, eating the right foods, getting enough sleep, these basic levers that we do consistently for decades. That's really what pays the dividends, right? Your body works in cycles, not days, so real change shows up over about 3 of them. I mapped it out month by month in a guide called the 90-Day Reset Roadmap, so you know exactly what's normal and what to expect during the shift. I'll drop the link in the show notes. Okay, I want to talk a little bit about how you could identify if you might be struggling with low muscle mass. What kinds of symptoms could you connect the dots back to say, gee, maybe I should take on a little bit more strength training? So the first thing that you would actually notice is fatigue is a symptom. So without enough muscle to efficiently utilize glucose, you can experience more of these energy spikes and crashes from mealtime. Your cells can become chronically underfueled, mitochondria will suffer, and the result is this kind of persistent fatigue that sleep doesn't fully fix. So look into your fatigue. So another issue is more cravings, right? So blood sugar can be more challenging to maintain without adequate levels of muscle mass. And the brain will send out more signals for some sort of quick energy fixes. So you'll have more cravings for carbohydrate rich things. There's also research that points to how muscle is tied to ghrelin and leptin, which are these neurotransmitters that control hunger and satiety. So everything is interconnected. And if you're noticing more cravings, it could be a sign that you might have low muscle mass. More blood sugar crashes, right? So cravings, there's one thing. And then, of course, what happens after you have too many cookies from that cravings, right? You might get a quick boost and then a rapid crash. And if you have a lot of these swings without enough muscle to buffer and to engage that glucose, blood sugar can dip more sharply after meals, which will leave you with that hypoglycemic feeling of feeling shaky and tired and, brain foggy, and then reaching for more snacks, right? So it's a vicious cycle. Another one is more stubborn weight or challenges with losing weight. And again, this is near and dear to my heart. And I, again, wish I could go back in time and tell myself to do much more strength training than all that cardio I was doing to try to deal with my PMOS obesity challenge. But less muscle means really slower resting metabolism. And that's a problem because then you have less efficient glucose disposal and a body that defaults to more fat storage. So this is also why, because of that, cardio doesn't really address this problem. You can certainly burn calories while you're doing the cardio, but it's not sustainable. Whereas if you do a strength training session, you could be burning calories all day and the next day and the next day because those muscles, as they grow, are much more glucose hungry and will engage the carbohydrates that you're eating, which is why a lot of women who start strength training say, gee, I can eat more carbohydrates now and I'm still slim. It's because you've built a better container for those carbohydrates, AKA your muscle. Another sign is more PMS or cycle irregularity. Like we talked about earlier, the impact that not having enough muscle has on your ovarian function is profound, and it will, in fact, impair its ability to ovulate regularly and produce adequate levels of progesterone, as those two activities are incredibly tied together, right? Ovulation is required for you to produce the corpus luteum that then releases the progesterone for that luteal phase in the cycle. So when you have not enough progesterone, that's when you have PMS, right? And so this is one of the reasons why cycle syncing is really so helpful for women, because it helps you, make sure that you're strength training consistently, using cardio in the right ways throughout the month, and eating differently to help you with that progesterone production. Another symptom of low muscle mass that is unexpected is more anxiety, more mood swings, and less stress resilience, right? So again, think about what chronic blood sugar instability and chronic inflammation does to the brain, right? Just even if we don't understand all the technical things about it, you can imagine that the brain would not be thriving or able to perform optimally in that environment. And what it does on a technical level is, by elevating cortisol, we're going to be disrupting neurotransmitter production like serotonin and GABA and dopamine. They all become harder to regulate, and it shrinks that emotional resilience that we need to feel more mood stable. So muscle mass is a part of this journey. I would say another important one that you wouldn't be able to self-observe, but if you got a DEXA scan, you would be able to see, is more difficulty maintaining bone density, right? So hormones, muscle, and bone density are all incredibly related, right? So resistance training directly brings that mechanical force needed to strengthen the skeletal mass. But without that signal and without the correct hormonal environment, adequate muscle can help maintain, bone density can decline faster. So it's definitely worth getting a DEXA scan if you haven't gotten one, just to check in on the state of your skin. If you need a good motivation to start strength training, because what's cool is you could get your first DEXA scan, start a strength training regimen and retest and see the improvements that you could be making. The last one is one I think that plagues a lot of us as women. It's the signs of metabolic dysfunction, despite quote unquote eating healthy. So again, without enough muscle tissue for glucose to be put somewhere useful, even a clean diet can't compensate for low muscle mass. So you could have high triglycerides on a blood test or creeping A1C levels, and then that stubborn weight. So all of these things are signs of metabolic dysfunction, and some lab work could help reveal that. Again, if you're suspicious that perhaps you don't have enough muscle mass, those are some tests that you could do. All right, so this next section I want to go into is just things that you can start doing to start building muscle and maintaining muscle without living at the gym. And, I have gone through a phase of life where I was at the gym very intensely, and I'm finding a better balance with that. But here's the science, okay? The research is pretty clear that from like a longevity perspective, so getting all the benefits, the cardio protection, the bone density protection, the muscle mass maintenance, that one would imagine you'd have to be working out every single day, but actually the science shows that you only need to do strength training 2 times a week. So if you want to be a bio slacker, this is one of those places where you could do that and still get a huge bang for your biohacking buck. So 2 full body sessions a week is that minimum viable dose to build muscle mass. And I love that, because if you're just starting out, that is so doable. But if you're someone who's super busy like me, that's also really doable. So I try to do 4 times a week now, because I just like splitting my upper body days and my lower body days like that. But if I'm in an intensely, busy week or period of time or whatever's going on, then I know that my bare minimum is like 2 full body days a week. And it's really nice to know that you don't have to go crazy with this. Um, it's really about consistency at a lower frequency that beats intensity, that leads to burnout any day. And also, you've got to be thinking, again, the long game, because you got to be doing this for life. It's not like you're going to do it, get into your bikini, and then stop doing it. You are going to be strength training with progressive overload, meaning consistently adding weights or the amount of reps and then weights week over week. So this is a lifelong journey. Okay, another place to get started, aside from the amount of times that you want to work out, is, if we're going to make this the minimum viable dose and make it as easy as possible, is focus on full body routines versus split routines. So when you get more comfortable with your strength training routine, you can do split routines and do more, like I do, upper body days and lower body days. But you, for now, can just get started with 2 full body strength training sessions a week. You hit every major muscle group. You create more frequent muscle building signals with less time investment. I just think it's really efficient. And like I said, if I'm traveling, if I'm busy, this is what I do, and it's very effective. Another thing to do without spending all of your life at the gym is to prioritize compound movements. So things that work multiple muscle groups at the same time, like kettlebell swings that then, end in something that you're, pushing up with the shoulder, or squats, deadlifts, lunges, rows, presses, dips, pull-ups, planks. I mean, there's just so many fun things to do. Once you get comfortable with all the different exercises you can do, you kind of can make it a game of what are all the things that you could possibly do. For example, a squat. Why is just a squat, even if you didn't incorporate upper body with it? It is still a compound movement because it works glutes, hamstrings, core, back, far more than an isolation exercise would do. So you get a lot of muscle activation with less time at the gym doing lots of different types of movements. The next thing, of course, is to use progressive overload in a simple way. So progressive overload really just means gradually increasing the challenge so that muscles adapt and grow, right? That's really the whole point. So the simplest approach is when the weight starts to feel like really easy for you and you can bang out 12 reps and you're like, wow, that was so light, right? Then you just want to increase it by like 2.5 pounds. Right? And drop the reps from 12 to 10. Then instead of adding weight immediately the next week when you come back to that exercise, just see if you can go back up to 12 reps. Once you get back up to 12 reps, then add some more weight, drop the reps, right? And that's kind of the way you do it. So you're not only just thinking about adding weight with progressive overload, you're also thinking about adding the amount of reps as well. Okay, another way to build muscle. So we've talked about how many times you should do it a week. We've talked about how to structure your workouts, right? So full body routines. We've talked about using compound moves. We've talked about progressive overload. Now I want to remind you to eat enough protein, okay? Because protein is the raw material that muscles need to repair and grow after training. Carbohydrates are important too, but without enough protein, strength training will not help you build more of that muscle mass. You've got to fuel properly. So a general target is approximately 1 gram per pound of body weight per day. So that is definitely typically when I work with women much more than they're used to consuming. Once you get in the routine of this, it's not that hard, you know. I definitely do 30 grams of protein at breakfast, at lunch. I sometimes add in like a protein shake in the afternoon and then 30 grams at dinner. And there I'm at my, 120 grams of protein, which is a little low. Technically I could go up to 150, but I'm more comfortable here. So prioritize leucine-rich foods like eggs, poultry, fish, Greek yogurt, cottage cheese. All of these things help build muscle. Okay. Another item, which I started to talk about in this protein conversation, is the fueling your muscle growth properly. So you don't undereat, okay? Don't do fasted workouts, especially in the luteal phase. You've heard me talk about this so many times, but this really backfires for women because it dysregulates your glucose, it exacerbates your hormonal challenges. It stimulates the body to start utilizing cortisol to fuel the workout, and chronically elevated cortisol will start to suppress progesterone production. So then we get into a vicious cycle of fasted workouts, progesterone insufficiency, stubborn weight, and cravings, right? So that none of that is going to help your muscle building journey. So eat some protein and carbs before you work out. This could be like Chobani has a great smoothie. It's like 30 grams of protein, 20 grams of protein, a few carbs, some healthy fats. It's a really good pre-workout snack if you can tolerate dairy. I cannot, so I do some egg whites and some fruit. And then when you come back from your workout, have some whole grains. You can have some oatmeal if that's what your jam is. You could have some sweet potatoes. You could have some brown rice. You need some fuel to get right into the muscle tissue to help them expand and grow. So you've got to really be thinking about fueling your workouts properly. And the last one that I would say is take creatine. I know it's super trendy, but actually the science adds up, not just from a muscle perspective, but an ovarian perspective. So let's start with the muscle piece. Creatine is one of the most well-researched supplements available, and it is totally underutilized by women. It helps muscles produce more energy efficiently during resistance training. So it supports heavier lifts and faster recovery. But it also has research showing its benefits on cognitive performance, bone density, and mood and hormonal health, right? So we actually know that creatine is required by the ovary in ovulation, in producing sex hormones. So there are now studies that link it to healthier pregnancies. I mean, there's just a huge benefit for women to be taking creatine. So you can just take the minimum dose, 5 grams a day. It's what I do. It is totally useful. You can just take it every single day. I know there are people who are taking bigger doses, but start with the standard dose and see how you do. I wanted to share a 5 move full body strength circuit designed for women who are time limited, 5 compound movements that are done back to back with minimal rest. It'll hit every major muscle group. It'll create real muscle building stimulus. It'll take less time than you spend scrolling. It'll be about 20 minutes of your day. And this will be something that we're going to link in the show notes. So you can find the link for this. And it's really simple. Again, it meets all the criteria that we talked about today, 2 sessions a week. And it'll really start improving your muscle mass and your hormonal environment. So don't let perfect be the enemy of good. Just get started, and you don't have to go to the gym. You can do it at home with body weights, with dumbbells, whatever you've got. All right. I hope you are so inspired to start your strength training routine after today's episode. You learned how muscle today is one of the most important metabolic organs for women's hormonal health. We learned about how low muscle mass can make blood sugar regulation harder. We learned about how poor insulin sensitivity can disrupt ovarian function and cause hormonal aging to happen more rapidly. We talked about how muscle can help lower inflammation, which matters because inflammation contributes to that accelerated ovarian aging. We talked about how maintaining muscle can help reduce symptoms, whether they be in PMS or fertility-related symptoms or perimenopause, and how muscle can support better mood, energy, and metabolic health. We looked at the symptoms that you could track for yourself to see if low muscle mass is a problem for you, like fatigue, cravings, blood sugar crashes, stubborn weight gain, PMS, mood swings, poor stress response, and signs of dysfunction with your metabolism. We learned that building muscle does not require living at the gym, that there is a minimum viable dose, and that is twice per week with full body workouts. We learned that compound movements give you the most return for your time. We learned about progressive overload and how enough protein and proper fueling and creatine is all supportive of building muscle and maintaining that muscle. So we also learned, importantly, that the goal is not perfection. We're not chasing aesthetics. We are chasing hormonal health, and how muscle is a huge lever in your biohacking arsenal as women. Building that muscle and maintaining it over your lifespan is a really big flex when it comes to ovarian health and hormonal longevity. So it's something I really want you to consider adding into your biohacking stack. If this episode helps you understand your muscles, your hormones in a completely new way, make sure you follow the podcast on Apple Podcasts or Spotify so you never miss an episode. I'm also sharing bonus content and Q&A episodes for my Ovary Club insiders. There are details in the show notes about how you can join me there. And if you know a woman who would benefit from this episode, who's been thinking about starting strength training but not sure how or feeling overwhelmed, please share it with her, because the more we understand our bodies and how to do what actually works, it's going to reduce all of our stress, all of our overwhelm, but also help us collectively get healthier the way that we need to as women in a gender-specific way. And I think that is just so worth it because we're all connected. So thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you in the next episode.